So today I'll be speaking about the relationship between clandestine or undocumented migration and visuality. Specifically, I'll examine artworks that deal with cross-border mobilities across the Euro-African space. So my talk is structured in three parts. In the first part, I'll briefly introduce the key questions and concepts that lie at the heart of my research. And in the second part, I'll look closely at Ursula Biemann's art project, Sahara Chronicle, that charts migration networks across North and Sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, I'll explore the problem of making clandestine migration visible in an art context. So the question of visibility and invisibility is really at the heart of my project, specifically in regards to undocumented migration. I'd like to begin by showing a clip from a video titled Temporary Detention Center by Albanian artist Adrian Paci. So this video was shot in San Jose Airport in 2007, and the title of the video refers to the Italian name for detention centers that house undocumented migrants and refugees. So I'm going to show a clip from that video. So, I'm sorry. A 5-minute work, but I edited it to shorten time. So in the clip we see a wide-angle shot of an airport runway where a group of people appear to be climbing a mobile stairway. As the camera pans back, we see that the stairs are freestanding, unattached to a plane. The final sequence of the video that we see here gains almost a sculptural presence. The camera alternates between close-up humanizing views of the individuals' faces and the long shots of the stairs, underscoring the immobilized position of these passengers without a destination. It's clear that these would-be passengers are not a cosmopolitan mobile elite. In fact, they belong to a group that the media and mainstream political discourse typically paint as invaders, smugglers, or victims, or the so-called illegal aliens according to the US immigration law. Their suspension on a stairway to nowhere reflects the uncertain status of many displaced people detained in camps or forced to maintain precarious lives with low-paying jobs in metropolitan cities. Through its absurdist staging and delayed revelation, Paci's video transforms the airport, a quintessential symbol of globalization and mobility, into a space of arrested movement for a group stranded in legal limbo. In doing so, it positions mobility as a major resource and privilege that cannot be equally accessed by all people. As I mentioned, my larger project investigates the visual politics of cross-border mobilities. But I wanted to start with a video that kind of visualizes arrested movement. Paci's video evokes the threat of deportation that's become pervasive in the lives of millions of migrants. By naming this work after Italian detention camps, Paci draws attention to the EU's border politics, which is highly focused on controlling migration from the global south. The literal translation of the video's title, Center for Temporary Permanence, aptly captures the state of being permanently temporary, a state especially pertinent in detention centers where many migrants are forced to live for long periods of time with limited rights and opportunities available to them. But my project in general extends beyond this condition of deportation and entrapment depicted in this video. I examine the complex social networks and infrastructures produced by migrant mobilities within and beyond European borders. And the works I analyze have been profoundly shaped by the recent changes in the political climate of Europe since the early 1990s with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the disintegration of the Soviet Union. So this period witnessed the increased visibility of non-Western minorities in Europe and the rise of new migrant networks expanding to North and Sub-Saharan Africa. In the past few decades, Europe has encouraged free movement, as I'm sure all you know, within EU territory, while closing its borders against migrants and refugees from non-European areas. And in recent years, several artists and filmmakers have challenged European border politics. Their works investigate Europe from various angles and question its status as a cultural and political force and as a multicultural society. For example, and this is the map of detention centers in Europe, and they are actually increasing, day by day. Just to give you a visual idea. And they are also expanding outside of European borders, of course. So this is an example of one of the artistic works that challenge European borders. Between the years 2000 and 2005, Serbian artist Tanja Ostojic did an interactive web project titled Looking for a Husband with an EU Passport. To obtain a residence permit for Germany, she posted her nude photo on the internet in search of an EU citizen interested in marriage. Her picture deployed in quotation marks concentration camp aesthetics, and that's her own words. She received and exchanged over 500 letters initiated by this ad, and finally she decided to marry a German citizen, artist Clement Golf. And the wedding was, done in Belgrade as a performance. Ostojic's Looking for a Husband with an EU Passport tackles the interrelations of gender politics and global capitalism and depicts the intersections of isolation, poverty, and the EU policies of exclusion. In my research, I focus on diverse forms of mobility such as labor migration, postcolonial migration, and tourism, and I explore counter-hegemonic imaginations that films and video installations invoke. So I look at kind of widely circulating films. This is another example from installation. Oh, this is actually an interesting image that she's drawing on the origin of the world by Gustave Courbet. So in my work, I look at widely circulating feature films such as Turkish-German cinema and French Maghrebi cinema. But one of the contributions that I try to make to the field of migrant and diasporic art and culture is looking at under-researched works that circulate in museums and galleries that are only available to a certain group of people. And today I'd like to look at one of them. It's called Sahara Chronicle, as I mentioned before. And this project was made by Zurich-based artist Ursula Biemann, and it's a multi-screen installation. And it's an art and research project that documents the complex networks of African mobilities in relation to border control systems developed by the EU. And again, I'd like to start by showing you a clip from this installation project. And the video I'm going to show is Desert Truck Terminal for Libya. And this is one of the several videos that were included in the installation. There are, I think, 12 to 13 videos, and the numbers are increasing because Ursula Biemann is making new videos every day. So I'd like to show this video because it's set in Agadez It's one of the central points of intersection in sub-Saharan migration. So let's see a few minutes of the video and then I'll talk about it.
Oui, je suis un coxeur. Un coxeur, c'est lui qui fait... Oui, c'est lui qui fait voyage aux frères nigériens pour aller en Libye ou bien en Algérie. Il nous enlève notre commission. Tu vois, je suis un agent. On a une agence. Tu vois.
lokacin nan ce mishi da rika yana cikin sandika muna shiga turkin linkin haka har ya zo gari ne linkin haka sai yan doka ne amma yanzu da yake ton demilka na fita sandika ne haka ana da adres bisa motoci na da adres nan cikin garage ga shi can na stt transport sahariya wanda duk ya tafi cikin motoci ne har ya saba da su ko nigeria ko ghana ko wani guri ne sai ya zo nan ne haka ya zo nan ne direct gare mu haka sai ya shigo mu kuma suna regin ne kuma da takardu ne da telefon da komai da komai ya duk ci mishi duk mota wanda za ta tafiya ne tana da guda mu kuma muna da guda gare mu haka sai ya shigo mu ina garage ne in kun zo nan ne ana yawan ta yin kai ko ku bude ku gani a'a ban sani ba sai kun gan gida ne a yi ne ba ni ne ka ba da firki kan akwai su ne muna doka an babu su sai mu doka kaya na gari shoji ma da kansu ne akwai rufuri ne sun yi son su ba mu ne haka da autorite da can saboda ikan
Donc les passagers payent leur billet d'ici Durkou. Arrivés Durkou, ils ont une adresse là-bas que s'ils arrivent, il y a des gens qui le font trouver une voiture pour traverser, aller jusqu'à Libye.
Sahara Chronicle takes viewers to many places like Agadez. So you can see Agadez is really kind of an intersecting point for many diverse migrant routes. So the work as a whole, the installation as a whole, explores the key zones of migration networks in Africa. When presented in the gallery, the installation includes several videos that combine footage collected during Biemann's field trips to the main hubs and transit points of the migration network in Mauritania, Morocco, Niger, and Libya. And Biemann presents these networks as a system of information and social organization that operates on a widespread geographical scale. These social networks change and morph along the way, affected by the high-tech surveillance systems and detention camps. So the videos of Sahara Chronicle collectively highlight the interplay between trans-Saharan human mobilities and the border control technology, both of which demand complex infrastructures. So this is another map. You can see the networks, the routes actually are expanding all the way to China, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So we are talking about a large network, a very complex and shifting network of human mobility. And these shifting networks, migrant networks documented in this project, demand a critical look at the evolving mobility regime in the EU. the effects of which have been felt not only on the outer edges of the European countries, but also way beyond their borders. So we are talking about a different understanding of border that's shifting beyond the physical, borders of the nation states or European kind of, transnational institutions or international institutions like European Union. So, following the Schengen, the EU's member nations opened their borders to each other, but the free movement of people within the EU territory, an ideal now it's collapsing, has been enabled by increasing militarization of the common external border. The effects of these recent changes is generally characterized as the creation of a fortress Europe, a term that evokes images of walls or barbed wires. However, as Sahara Chronicle shows, the borders of Europe have become highly flexible and shifting, expanding to the sub-Saharan region and beyond. To be more specific, in recent years, Europe has pressured the Euro-Mediterranean countries and Maghreb countries to stem migration flows from the south. By offering conditional aid in return, the EU has sought to transform the Maghreb into a militarized zone to block the flood of migrants, in quotation marks. So the EU has tried to create a buffer zone outside of the borders of the EU, right, to kind of prevent the incoming migrants. Long, fragmented, and often highly risky overland and sea journeys have in turn become the key feature of undocumented migration. And the increasing urge to curb migration have pushed a significant number of migrants outside the law and forced them to take dangerous routes that put their lives at risk. So Biemann's Sahara Chronicle links the unstable categories of legal, illegal migration to the visual realm. So this reading of her project is influenced by the work of art historian W.J.T. Mitchell, who has argued that the problem of immigration is structurally and necessarily bound with the production and circulation of images. According to Mitchell, images precede the migrant in the sense that before the migrant arrives, his or her image arrives first in the form of stereotypes, search templates, and tables of classification. Hence, images strongly shape the ways migrants are perceived in legal and sociopolitical domains. The media, as I'm sure you guys all know, the media has a vital role in the construction of illegality and foreignness as recognizable objects of representation. And mainstream media images of undocumented migration often take the form of racialized images such as boat people from Africa, who are typically depicted as victims or criminals. So while a contingent legal system produces the categories of the illegal and the foreigner, the mainstream media naturalizes these categories by visually and discursively framing migrant movements as an invasion of borders or a security threat. In other words, the images of illegalized migration and border security systems reinforce each other. So artistic projects like Sahara Chronicle provide an alternate mode of encounter with images of migrancy that prompts a shift in our perception of migrant experience. I'd like to show some images from other videos of the project Sahara Chronicle, because the project draws the attention away from the language of invasion and widens its scope to include a vast geography and diverse migrant groups that are invisible in mainstream discourses around migration. And the locations featured in Sahara Chronicle are part of a larger network of hubs, places, and nodes where migrants stop over, often for indeterminate periods of time, to prepare and sometimes to make money for the next leg of the journey. So we are talking about periods of non-stop movement and episodes of suspension, waiting and uncertainty. And the pace of the journey is something over which the migrants rarely have much control. Sahara Chronicle is a project was produced in the course of 3 years, and the videos include Tuareg border guides in the Libyan desert. This is an image from that video. footage that simulates the imagery of surveillance aircraft. In other videos, we see military patrols at the Algerian-Moroccan border, and we also witness haunting scenes from a deportation prison in Lyon, Western Sahara. So Sahara Chronicle assembles a multiplicity of perspectives and investigates the relationship between visuality and migration in a way that redefines Sahara and North Africa as a contested space of human passage and smuggling, informal economies, military control, and surveillance. So with these thoughts in mind, I'd like to return to my initial example to explore the notion of visual counter-narratives of migration. So this is an image from the deportation prison Lyon. So the video Desert Truck Terminal, set in Agadez, highlights the city's role as an important trading place for the local Tuareg people and documents preparations for a highly risky desert journey. The video doesn't provide a panoramic shot of the desert. In most images we imagine Sahara as this kind of uninhabited empty space or a mythical landscape made of sand dunes, right? But instead, Biemann acknowledges that the Sahara is a dynamic migratory hub that is very much shaped by cross-regional mobilities. And increasing traversability, increasing ability to cross the desert, especially since the 1990s, has transformed the Sahara into a major transit space. Yet the crossing of the desert is still very, very risky, which paradoxically makes it even more preferable for migrants because the dangerousness and the opacity of the desert provides invisibility while facilitating movement. So we see here invisibility as a major resource for undocumented migrants, and Sahara provides it, despite the fact that it's a very dangerous journey. So in Desert Truck Terminal, the mobilities we observe are improvisational in the sense that migrants determine their routes according to the contacts they establish and the information they get at each stop. Drawing on Abdulmalik Simone, an important urbanist, an important scholar in urban studies, and he works on African cities such as Johannesburg. So drawing on his work, we might even suggest that these social and economic relations embody an infrastructural system in which migrant bodies produce and activate the surrounding landscape. And these networks are organized through self-services and self-governing initiatives that are neither planned nor provided by the authorities and are available even to those with limited resources. The functioning of trans-Saharan networks depends on unstable contingent articulations of power and knowledge. For example, the Tuareg people, who have trans-regional connections and great familiarity with the region, heavily support the system. So I'm going to show a video that features an interview with Adawa. The name of this man is Adawa, and he was the head of the clandestine migration operations in Arlit. Arlit is an uranium town located on the Algerian migration route. So I'm just it's a long video again, but I'm gonna show a few minutes, kind of giving you a chance to hear his account.
Avec les 4x4 là, on achemine les différents immigrés qui désirent se rendre vers l'Europe. Nous avons songé à avoir des 4x4 pour faire la caravane, pour remplacer la caravane. Là où on fait avant 2 mois, 1 mois, aujourd'hui on les fait en 2 jours, 3 jours. On les embarque vers la frontière algéro-nigérienne ou nigéro-libyen. Et on les dépose. De là-bas, ils vont se démarquer, ils vont tenter de chercher d'autres moyens en Libye même ou en Algérie même pour pouvoir passer vers l'Europe. Nous n'avons aucun contact, aucun lien entre l'Afrique du Sud ou l'Afrique du Nord concernant ces immigrants. L'Afrique du Sud, de façon générale, on ne les demande pas de nous envoyer des gens pour qu'on leur fasse partir. Et l'Afrique du Nord aussi, elle ne nous demande pas de lui envoyer des gens pour qu'il leur fasse passer vers l'Europe. Non, nous n'avons pas de contact. Si tu viens, tu nous trouves, on va te demander où est-ce que tu vas. Si tu nous dis, tu veux aller passer vers l'Algérie et ton désir c'est de se rendre en Europe, pourquoi on te dit, pour qu'on te dépose à la frontière algérienne, paye tant de francs. Et si tu dis que tu veux pénétrer vers la Libye et tu désires se rendre en Europe, on te dit, ah, tu payes tant de francs. Quand tu nous payes ça, on va t'amener. Une fois arrivé à la frontière, on te dépose. Là, tu vas te débrouiller. On ne te connaît pas. Les consignes que notre autorité nous donne, c'est de faire attention au plan. Parce que leurs objectifs, on ne les sait pas. Si quand on voit un plan, il veut voyager, il veut faire l'axe là, on va les présenter d'abord à la commissariat. Il faut que la commissariat les libère d'abord. Il lui donne l'ordre de passer. Là, c'est le staff des mouvements. Et qu'est-ce qui nous a poussé, nous-mêmes, communauté Touareg, à encourir tous ces risques-là? La mort, être arrêté par les différentes autorités. Donc ça, en quelque sorte, nous sommes toujours dans une rébellion.
All right.
Which year was that?
This was in 2006. Yeah, so it's actually, I want to open a parenthesis here because before 2011, these networks were much more informal, whereas since the Syrian civil war, in which we have migrants who have more money to pay, relatively more money to pay, these networks have become much more professional and perhaps more criminalized. But up until 2011, they were much more informal and based on kind of contacts people establish on their way to Europe or to North Africa. So this account reveals that the Tuaregs' knowledge of the harsh Saharan geography and their ability to speak multiple languages have enabled them to establish a transport business that sustains them in spite of the lack of other job opportunities. We don't have the time to go into details, but of course, when we think about Tuareg community, we have to remember the colonial politics of space and post-colonial processes of nation building, the scramble of Africa and all that kind of the creation of national borders, artificial national borders that created dispersed Tuareg community and that prevented them to move freely in the Saharan region. His account also runs counter to the mainstream media's focus on the images of poverty, victimization and deprivation, and instead it sheds light on the locals' need and desire for work and better their economic positions and those of their communities. So much of what takes place in nodes and networks of mobility stay outside of the official regimes of visibility. In a way, these networks and locations constitute an underground system. So this is another video from Sahara Chronicle. It's called Architectures of Mobility, Layun, and it documents the structures that are intended to render migrants invisible to the surveillance systems. These images were produced by the Moroccan state using advanced surveilling tools, underscoring the pervasiveness of the visualizing apparatus employed to hinder unwanted mobilities. They expose hidden spaces of migrants and position us, the viewer, as a witness or participant, in migrant interceptions. Incorporating surveillance images into art practice might be seen as kind of a form of complicity between artistic practice and military operations. However, when placed within the context of larger improvisational systems, the function and meaning of these images change. Rather than standing as frozen images of successful interceptions, they become linked to other nodes and networks, such as the truck terminal in Agadez or the Tuareg Desert Guides. So finally, I'd like to move to an exploration of the idea of multi-screen installation and how it might contribute to this kind of critical discourse on migration. And I'm going to look at alternative forms of display, narrative, and social imagination that perhaps cultural installations offer. So this is another image from Architectures of Mobility. In 2010, Sahara Chronicle was presented at San Francisco Art Institute. In the installation, Biemann presented the videos in a combination of large screens with smaller monitors, a strategy that emphasized diverse modes of narration without asserting an overarching linear narrative. For example, if this was made as a traditional documentary, we would have encountered more truth claims or more kind of a linear narrative that would give us kind of a satisfaction at the end, a kind of the idea of grasping what's going on in total. But instead of doing that, the installation provides an incomplete, multi-layered mapping of spaces and subjects that constitute the complex geography it engages with. In a way, the form of the installation acknowledges the complexity of its subject. And as you can see in this picture, the desert truck terminal was projected on this, large scale on the wall. And we don't see here, but on the adjacent wall, we see another video, which is desert radio drone. So here you can imagine on one large screen, we see the kind of visceral experience of preparations on the ground. And on the opposite screen, we see a highly artificial image, surveillance, drone image. So that's the kind of associative montage Biemann uses, kind of to make us understand how those, preparations on the ground, the risky desert journey, is linked to highly advanced surveillance technologies. And she provides many different accounts, many different voices and perspectives. So by distributing the work across several loosely interconnected screens, Biemann alludes to the ever longer and highly fragmented nature of the migrant journey with its elusive departure and arrival points. While Sahara Chronicle's formal structure mirrors the complexity of its subject, it moves beyond the simple equivalence between sign and image. Biemann's highly mediated project is characterized by texts streaming over images sourced from a variety of origins, including maps, appropriated footage from official sources, and her own recordings in the field. So this whole project, in a way, pulls apart the seeming naturalness of the image, right? The naturalness of the image that we see on the media, representing both people as an anonymous mass of threatening people, right? So this project pulls apart that naturalness, makes us question any assumption of transparent representation of reality. Here, the goal is not the truthful depiction of an already existing subject, but the construction of a system of possibility that remains open and realizable in a multiplicity of ways by the viewer. And the migratory networks presented in this work signify not an enclosed representational space, but rather a world with multiple entries and exits that demands heterogeneous forms of representation, knowledge, and literacy. And one final question, perhaps that's something, to open the floor for discussion, is that, visualizing undocumented or clandestine migrants, brings up a whole set of representational and ethical questions, especially for outsiders who make films and artworks about them. And undocumented migrants, as I kind of tried to allude to before, they are trapped in a condition of illegality and deportability, and their visibility might put them at the risk of detention and deportation. And not surprisingly, most of the artworks made about them are done or were done by outsiders, and they are rarely the viewers of the artworks that they inspire. So Biemann doesn't conceal such paradoxes of political art, and she's sensitive to the ethical issues inherent in making visible those who necessarily strive to be invisible to survive. Her complex visual strategies and extensive fieldwork and research position the representation of invisible subjects and spaces as a significant function of contemporary art. So to be able to do this project, she actually does extensive fieldwork and research and makes contacts with NGOs and activists, as well as, undocumented people who strive to be invisible. So in this sense, this project works to unravel the frameworks that dehumanize undocumented migrants or cast them as invaders. By attending to trans-Saharan mobility networks and infrastructures and highlighting the restrictive migration politics of the EU, Sahara Chronicle produces a counter-geography of Europe. And as we have seen, the aesthetic and formal concerns of the work reflect and are informed by its political concerns. Thank you.